they would say to us the institutional response of the military was even worse than sexual assault. And if you think about it, that's a pretty strong statement, because what's worse than sexual assault? Well, it turns out institutional betrayal sometimes can be. Institutional betrayal, very broadly, is when an institution doesn't do right by those who are dependent upon it. It can take the form of overt betrayal, like a genocide, but it can also take the form of failure to protect when protection is reasonably expected. And individuals do expect protection from many institutions.
Welcome to Perverted Justice. This is not just a story. It's a call to action for integrity and radical honesty, in spite of personal cost. Now here's your host, Shielagh Clark.
Welcome back. This is episode 14 in a serial podcast, meaning each episode builds on the last. If you are just tuning in now for the first time, I'd encourage you to start at the beginning. All right, so we are camping out in the summer of 2022 for the next few episodes. I'm going to do my best to cover this pivotal time period as thoroughly as it deserves and try not to go overboard with information. But to set the stage for this entire period, really, honestly, this entire process, the listener needs to understand institutional betrayal. This issue drives straight to the heart of why I felt it was important to speak up so many years later about what happened to me. And it has been the main issue standing between me and the church ever since. Most people currently or formerly associated with the church maintain that Weaver was the sole harm doer in my story, because they mistakenly believe that because the institution may not have intended to do harm, it is therefore not responsible for having done harm regardless. This position completely absolves the institution from its duty to form the sort of culture that protects the people it gathers. The church has an obligation to understand the effect that it has on the vulnerable and to build into its structure safeguards against abuse as well as safeguards against betrayal. Betrayal is real and incredibly damaging regardless of the intent behind the actions. In fact, I would argue that the church's response to my abuse disclosure was far more damaging to me than the sexual abuse on its own. Unfortunately, as I have attempted to highlight this issue by bringing the church's failures to light so that they can be learned from, thus enabling the culture to shift in a meaningful way that would protect others in the future, I have only experienced more of the same betrayal trauma from a place that claims to be radically different than it was in 2005. In 2024, I submitted to a psychological evaluation in preparation for trial. I have lots of feelings about this that I'm not going to get into right now, but as part of the psychologist's analysis of my functioning, she took quite a bit of time to assess the church's behavior during the abuse and immediately after disclosure in order to determine its effect on me. And as you'll see, despite the church's claim that it is a totally new church, much of what was harmful then has not changed at all and continues to be harmful to me today. I'm going to read excerpts from the psychologist's report on Hyde Park Baptist Church, now known as Romans Road Bible Church. She writes, "Institutional betrayal occurs when an institution, such as a church, school, sports team, etc., causes harm to an individual who trusts or depends upon that institution. Institutional betrayal frequently occurs as a result of an institution's response to sexual victimization. Assessing institutional betrayal is important in evaluations of psychological injury because the phenomenon is associated with elevated rates of a variety of negative post-traumatic outcomes, including anxiety, dissociation, sexual dysfunction, and health problems. This is why institutional responses to sexual assault have sometimes been termed secondary victimization, or even the second rape. In fact, recent research suggests that institutional betrayal appears to cause additional post-traumatic symptoms over and above the effects of the interpersonal betrayal alone. In the following section, I describe scientific information about institutional betrayal particularized for Ms. Clark's case. Facets of institutional betrayal. A study by Smith and Fried in 2014 describes numerous facets of an institution's response to disclosures of victimization that may constitute institutional betrayal. Ms. Clark, the affidavit by a former deacon, Boyd Gonzalez, which I addressed in, I think, episode 2, and all 6 collateral interviewees with first-hand knowledge of the functioning of Hyde Park Baptist Church around the time of Ms. Clark's involvement there reported information consistent with all facets of institutional betrayal. Facet number 1, failure to prevent abuse. Institutions may cause feelings of betrayal when they fail to prioritize abuse prevention policies. Per multiple informants, Hyde Park Baptist Church appeared to lack basic abuse prevention policies, given that Weaver repeatedly and flagrantly engaged in high-risk behaviors for years. Spending time alone with youth in his office with the door closed, as an example. Per the former deacon's affidavit, Hyde Park Baptist Church apparently had no guidelines at all for Weaver's interaction with youth. The second facet, normalizing abusive contexts. Institutions may cause feelings of betrayal when they promote, tolerate, or excuse high-risk contexts due to the special circumstances of the institution. As an autonomous church without direction from or accountability to anyone outside the institution, Hyde Park Baptist Church's organizational structure apparently made it difficult for others at the church to effectively curb Weaver's increasingly suspicious or inappropriate behavior around youth. As a sidebar, I'm adding this, I'm not quoting. Currently, that same organizational structure is allowing the organization to keep Murray in a position of spiritual leadership despite his repeated, sexually fueled lies about me, thus continuing to normalize and even promote abusive context. Facet number 3, difficult reporting systems and inadequate responses. Institutions may cause feelings of betrayal when they make it difficult for victims to report sexual abuse or to fail to respond adequately following a disclosure of sexual assault. This appears to be the case at Hyde Park Baptist Church. Neither Ms. Clark nor any other informant described any institutional system for reporting sexual abuse within the church. Further, many churches believe that conflicts between Christians should only be resolved between Christians. In other words, the church should not rely on other institutions, such as the legal system, to resolve conflicts between its members. Hyde Park Baptist Church's bylaws state that the church possesses all the resources necessary to resolve personal disputes between members. This philosophy creates a risk for institutional betrayal when in-house leadership in fact lacks the knowledge, expertise, or ability to respond appropriately to disclosures of sexual abuse, which almost always requires involving others outside the institution. Given these shortcomings, Ms. Clark and other informants related that the church responded in an inadequate, stigmatizing, and harmful manner after the abuse came to light in 2005. My sidebar, the response to me in 2019 and every day since is still in total alignment with this facet of institutional betrayal. They had no formal process to help them receive me well in 2019, and their inadequate and horrendous response to me this time around has been just as harmful as the first time. Fourth facet of institutional betrayal is supporting cover-ups and misinformation. Institutions may cause feelings of betrayal when they tacitly support or fail to contradict misinformation about the abuse. This appeared to be the case at Hyde Park Baptist Church. Multiple informants reported that the church framed Weaver's behavior primarily as infidelity, as opposed to predatory, long-term, and illegal sexual abuse of an adolescent. Because of the infidelity narrative, many members perceived Weaver as merely a wayward husband rather than a sexual abuser, while they perceived Miss Clark as the other woman rather than the victim of criminal sexual abuse. While informants report that not every member of the congregation adopted this narrative, they also indicated that church leadership failed to take any proactive steps to correct this misinformation within the church community. Hyde Park Baptist Church leadership also reportedly made decisions that actively and predictably promoted this false narrative. Specifically, several informants described how church leadership permitted or directed Weaver to make a statement at a congregational meeting. This allowed him to get out in front of the situation and advance his preferred narrative by being the first to tell his version of the story publicly. Hyde Park Baptist Church leadership permitted him to make this public statement and did not take meaningful steps to correct the narrative he advanced. Further, as corroborated by every informant, sometime later, church leadership directed Miss Clark to make her own statement at a second congregational meeting, during which she tearfully apologized to the church and blamed herself for the sexual abuse. This decision by church leadership advanced a false narrative about the abuse by casting Weaver and Miss Clark as co-equal transgressors who both owed the church apologies for their behavior. My side note, as you already heard in previous episodes, Murray and Valentine used the pulpit to continue a misinformation campaign about my abuse and pursuit of the truth. They repeatedly framed me as an unrighteous entity attacking the church, intentionally skewing the congregation's view of me and leading the institution again toward disbelief and abandonment instead of support and healing. The fifth facet of institutional betrayal is punishing victims and whistleblowers. Institutions may cause feelings of betrayal if they inflict or allow negative consequences for disclosing abuse. According to Miss Clark, she was punished for disclosure because Hyde Park leadership placed her under church discipline as a result. As part of this discipline, she was reportedly required to conduct multiple acts of penitence, which included making a public apology to the church body, surrendering her phone to the pastors, attending counseling with a pastor's wife who was also in communication with Weaver's counselor at the time and did not respect her confidentiality. Miss Clark and other informants also described her being ostracized by people at the church. Again, no sources describe church leadership taking any meaningful actions to counteract this exclusionary behavior among its members, which extended to at least one pastor's family. Her sister explained, Shielagh was left there to try to pick up the pieces and try to absorb the shock and anger and horror of the entire church, who had placed Weaver on a pedestal, frankly. The very same shunning occurred in response to my pursuit of the truth in 2019. This is my sidebar. So while I was no longer a member, which left them without the ability to church discipline me formally this time, they have effectively taken the exact same steps. The discussions were not focused on the merits of my reports, much less their failure to protect, but on my supposed sinfulness for daring to speak the truth loudly and publicly via the court system. I became the unrepentant sinner in 1 Corinthians 5 who needed to be thrown to Satan. They know that what I need from them is connection, vulnerability, and apology. but as punishment for embarrassing them with the truth, they have effectively cut me off. In summary, available information indicates that Hyde Park Baptist Church exemplified every facet associated with institutional betrayal surrounding sexual victimization, as identified by experts. The church's inadequate and inappropriate response to a disclosure of sexual victimization appeared to result from a combination of the church's organizational and leadership structure, priorities, and culture. Ms. Clark described feeling extraordinarily betrayed by Hyde Park Baptist Church's response, and this scientific analysis supports her perception of institutional betrayal. She summarized, "I think I could have made a lot of headway into recovery if they had told me that I was abused, or if I had fallen into the protective arms of my community. Instead, I was blamed." My sidebar: the same holds true for the response the church offered in 2019 and beyond. Responding with care, support, and apology would have had a dramatically positive effect on my recovery. Instead, they consistently engaged in soul-gutting betrayal, which wrecked me again and again. So shortly after I posted the video about Alex breaking confidentiality, I posted another video, which was the compilation of Murray's lawsuit jokes, and I already played that for you in episode 6, but I'll link to it again in the show notes. That video finally produced my desired effect, and instead of just making people mad at me, I witnessed some horror in bystanders at the flippant and disgusting way that Murray had chosen to position himself in relation to such a serious matter. Joking about litigation while actively being sued for child sexual abuse in your church's history is reprehensible. And after some deliberation, Mike Green and his daughters arranged a meeting with Murray to discuss their opinion about his behavior. I had been engaging in some back and forth with Katie by text, and I sent her some photographs of pages out of the book called A Church Called Tove, which were the Tate's Creek public statement that I also read for you in a prior episode. And I think something about that was helpful to Katie and made some pieces fall into place for her. She actually read portions of that public statement to Murray in this meeting to try to help him to understand what it was that I was looking for from them, but it really did not have any effect on him at all. And Mike told Murray that he thought he was handling the situation incorrectly. Katie had told me before they were going that this meeting was going to happen, and I specifically asked her not to go on my behalf. I wanted them to go and say what it was that they felt like they needed to say, to point out the things that they felt were important. I didn't want them to go on my agenda. I wanted this to be a natural process, not me intervening. And I was very concerned about what would happen when they went in. What would Murray say? What would throw them off guard? And would they come out still feeling the same way? So in 1997, Dr. Jennifer Fried, professor of psychology at the University of Oregon and now founder and president of the Center for Institutional Courage, introduced the concept of DARVO in a peer-reviewed article about betrayal trauma. So she's the main investigator, researcher in this whole betrayal trauma issue. All of the things that we just reviewed, that's largely her work also. And pulling from her website, the definition for DARVO refers to a reaction perpetrators of wrongdoing may display in response to being held accountable for their behavior. DARVO stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. The perpetrator or offender may deny the behavior, attack the whistleblower, and reverse the roles of victim and offender such that the perpetrator assumes the victim role and turns the true victim or the whistleblower into an alleged offender. This occurs, for instance, when an actually guilty perpetrator assumes the role of falsely accused, attacks the accuser's credibility, and blames the accuser of being the perpetrator of a false allegation. An institutional DARVO is when DARVO is committed by an institution or with institutional complicity. Institutional DARVO is a pernicious form of institutional betrayal, which is the focus of this episode. So, rather than attempt to offer a play-by-play of a conversation I was not present for, I'm going to offer Murray's responses broken out by DARVO category, and then we'll talk about scapegoating. So, the Greens came to Murray in response to videos depicting him repeatedly telling jokes from the pulpit about getting sued. Murray denied guilt by angrily saying that I had taken his words out of context, despite the description of the video carefully detailing each joke along with the dates and timestamps for each joke. He apparently continued to speak in a jovial way about his long-time ritual of joking about litigation and refusing to acknowledge the harm that it was causing in this instance. Also in the category of denial, he denied the idea that the church is not safe for sexual abuse survivors based on their responses to me by boasting about their counseling ministry that he, his wife, and Alex Valentine run, which was supposedly equipped to help abuse survivors, and he bragged that they were, in fact, helping one right then. As a side note, I was told that an abuse survivor they were helping was joked about and said to have been looking for attention by claiming to be suicidal. Nothing about that scenario sounds like being equipped to help anyone recover from abuse. Moving on to attack, Murray said that I just seem angry, attacking my normal response to their awful behavior. He said that he couldn't trust me because I had supposedly promised not to sue the church, and then he was served with the lawsuit 2 weeks later. This particular issue will come up again later. I never promised not to sue the church, and I did not speak with Murray in the 8 months prior to this lawsuit. It has also come to my attention since the lawsuit ended that it was at this meeting that Murray claimed he'd had a meeting with me where I brought files to his office and leaned over his desk to try to get him to look down my shirt. So moving on to reverse victim and offender, Murray resorted to lamenting all of the pain and suffering that he and his family were enduring because of my lawsuit. If you talk to him today, he'll tell you that this lawsuit nearly killed him, all but blaming his strokes and heart attack on me. He claimed that he had tried to leave the church when the lawsuit was filed, but no other church will take him now because he's too controversial, which is a load of garbage. And he claimed that his aging mother thinks that he is a child abuser. Of course, he made sure to officially blame Weaver and claimed to be praying for me, while actually making himself out to be the real victim and me as the aggressor. And all of this was awful and had a profound effect on me, which I will get to in the next episode. I'm going to talk to you about my therapy session the next day. But I think the worst part about this meeting, honestly, was the way that Murray deflected accountability for the church by scapegoating the former secretary. If you remember back in the second or third episode when I told you to remember the reasoning they gave for firing Diane, I told you that the church claimed that they were eliminating her position, so they needed to let her go. If that were the real reason, that they were firing a woman who had faithfully functioned as church secretary for 21 years, where was her potluck celebration? Where was her thank you card with every white space filled with love and thank yous from her friends and fellow church members? That is 100% what anyone would expect a Baptist church to do for a faithful servant forced to resign due to funding issues. Obviously, none of that happened because that's not the real reason they let her go. Shortly after they were served with the lawsuit, so approximately 8 months after they fired Diane, Richard Murray's wife told a co-worker that they fired Diane because she had been the secretary during my abuse and she claimed not to know what happened while it was happening, so they fired her. In this meeting with the Greens, Murray made a nearly identical claim. He said that they'd confronted her and she denied knowing, and since there's no way that she couldn't have known, she had to go. In the Old Testament, on the Day of Atonement, the high priest would symbolically transfer the sins of the Israelite community onto the head of a goat. This goat would then be sent away into the wilderness, carrying the people's sin with it. This is obviously where the term scapegoating came from. And this heaping upon Diane, the transfer of the church's sin of complicity onto her person and sending her away, is a very literal reenactment of this concept. I would guess that most of the group of men who rotated on and off the board at that time were men who had been church members or leaders of Hyde Park Baptist Church back in the early 2000s. But none of them had to go. Just Diane. A woman in a system that devalues women. How fitting that the new scapegoat would be another powerless, innocent woman, and a widow no less. And if this weren't bad enough, Murray claimed that they had removed documents from her office to protect them from Diane. Remember I told you the church turned over nothing during the lawsuit? Alex claimed that they'd done a search and found nothing. But Murray said in this meeting that they had to protect documents from Diane and moved them, yet they never showed up in discovery. Diane sat with those documents for 21 years, and now, suddenly, she's a danger to them? Are you beginning to see more clearly what really happened and why I fully believe that they fired Diane because of her connection to me? What does it say about a church that fires the one person most likely to tell the truth and then slanders her name in the aftermath? I was so angry about the twisting of something so wicked to look like a supposed righteous investigation and purging. And I was even more angry that it appeared to work to disarm the people confronting Murray rather than to wake them up to his lies. The evening after this meeting with Murray, I spoke with Katie on the phone for 4 hours. And just to clarify, she actually asked me to clarify that she's given me permission to use her name. Using her name technically violates my policy of not naming people without power. But Katie is very committed to helping other people understand and to come around because she knows that she had some things wrong and she wants listeners to understand that it is okay to have gotten it wrong in the past and shift your position. And so she asks me to use her name and to tell her story. I spoke to her for 4 hours that night. I cried a lot. I hung up around 1 o'clock in the morning with a splitting headache and I couldn't sleep. If you've ever been accused of something untrue and had your brain start sifting through its files like one of those bill counting machines at the bank, searching for an explanation or something that would account for miscommunication, you might know how I was feeling. I was mostly conflicted over she promised she wouldn't sue the church, and 2 weeks later, I get served with a lawsuit. And since I could never have imagined that Murray would have fabricated an entire meeting just to be able to claim that he can't trust me, I operated off of the assumption that Donna Blue was the source because way back in December of 2019, I had told her that I held no personal grudges against anyone at Hyde Park. That was the only thing that I'd ever said that could possibly have been misconstrued or misunderstood to mean I will never sue the church. So see, I'm sitting over here functioning in truth and trying to engage people who are wildly dishonest. And I'm not referring to Donna Blue there, I'm referring to Richard Murray. But because I assumed that Donna was the source, I sent her an email at 2:00 in the morning, and I CC'd the church office. I will read that letter to you now. Donna, 3 times now, I have heard people make a claim that I promised I wouldn't sue the church, or that I wouldn't come after anyone there. 2 of those instances were things that I did not take seriously, that were posted online back when the lawsuit was filed in 2020. I've been thinking and thinking about where this could have come from, and I've narrowed it down to you. I told you that I had no personal grudges against anyone at Hyde Park Baptist Church. I didn't then. I might have a few now. I told you this in a desperate attempt to help you to understand what I needed from the church was the truth. I was on a quest for the truth of my life, and I hoped the church would help me find it. I tried hard that day to get through to the only person sort of willing to hear me. That is the only thing that I've said that could possibly have come anywhere near what's being said now. A promise I never made is being used as the basis for why Murray is claiming he cannot trust me. Dale wouldn't speak to me unless through proper channels, which needs to be corrected to in the proper way, and opted instead to run to Murray and have a meeting with Green and Mitchell about my intentions. Murray blew me off. The board huddled in a corner by the back door to talk about me. You repeatedly told me to stop speaking because I might tell you too much. And the church told the Greenville News they didn't want to have anything to do with Weaver's arrest. You all ran from me like I was a threat, while promising to pray for me, of course. But since I filed suit to be heard, I am not to be trusted? What is it going to take for me to be anything more than a threat to you people? When do I rise to person status? Human being loved by God and worth a risk status. When does that happen for me? Ever? You all obliterated a beautiful opportunity to redeem the past, and I am gutted. And I'm sure, that's the end of the letter, I'm sure that it comes as no surprise to you that I never received a reply to that email. I am weeping, pouring out my heart in the middle of the night, and I get no response. Like talking to a brick wall. I was completely distraught over being called a liar again about something that never even happened. Over my very appropriate anger being used as a weapon rather than an indicator of harm done. I was enraged to my core over it being acceptable for him to say, "We pray for her," while they actively bar me from any semblance of tangible care. I was sick to my stomach over the way Mike had walked in, sure that Murray was acting inappropriately, and then walked out saying, I wouldn't talk to someone who was suing me either. And I was absolutely gutted over Katie telling me that the lawsuit had just caused more hurt and confusion, and that she can't call Murray the bad guy because everything is just too confusing. I am thankful that both of them persisted in their attempts to love and care for me in tangible ways, and eventually were able to see for themselves that Murray had been and continues to be incredibly dishonest. But in the immediate aftermath of this meeting, I spiraled hard. I cried most of that night, and I got up in the morning with my eyes practically swollen shut, but very thankful that it was therapy day. And I went in with bedhead and swollen eyes to question every decision that I had ever made. And we will get to that next time. Thanks for listening.
If your community is dedicated to fostering a safe and supportive environment, connect with GRACE, Godly Response to Abuse in the Christian Environment, at netgrace.org. GRACE's mission is to empower Christian communities to recognize, prevent, and respond to abuse effectively. They provide vital resources and training to help churches understand the complexities of abuse and adopt effective prevention policy and trauma-informed responses.